I remember the exact moment the mirage began to shimmer, though I didn't recognize it for what it was at the time. My life, until then, had felt like solid ground beneath my feet, firm and predictable as the Phoenix desert floor after a rare, drenching rain. I was Mateo Sanchez, 41, a high school history teacher and head football coach. My days were filled with the shouts of teenagers on the practice field, the quiet rustle of old textbooks, and the comforting hum of a community that knew me, respected me, and had always felt like home. My integrity, my quiet strength, these were things people knew me for. They were also the very things that Elena, my wife, would expertly dismantle, piece by careful piece. Elena. Her name still catches in my throat, a phantom grit in the dry Arizona air. She was vibrant, a local event planner whose energy could light up any room. We lived in a beautiful home, all sun-baked adobe and cool tile, with a view of the mountains turning purple at sunset. Our life, I thought, was complete. We had our routines, our shared laughter over dinner, the quiet intimacy of evenings curled up on the couch. I loved her with a depth that felt ancient, a love that permeated every corner of my existence. I truly believed she loved me back with the same unwavering devotion. That was the foundation of my world, the bedrock. Looking back, that foundation was built on sand, a trick of the light designed to collapse. We met at a community fundraiser, one of her meticulously organized events. I was awkwardly trying to make conversation near the silent auction table, feeling out of place in my dress shirt and tie, when she practically danced over, a whirlwind of dark hair and sparkling eyes. She laughed easily, a bright, melodic sound, and she spoke with a passion that was infectious. She seemed to see something in me, something beyond the quiet, studious man. She saw strength, she said, a deep well of kindness. I was utterly captivated. I'd never met anyone so alive. Our courtship was a blur of desert sunsets and late-night conversations. She made me feel seen, cherished, understood in a way no one ever had. I saw her ambition, her drive, as admirable qualities, a perfect complement to my more grounded nature. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what true partnership feels like. We were an unlikely pair, the fiery artist and the steady historian, but it worked. Or so I believed. There were whispers, even then, little tremors beneath the surface of our perfect life. Elena was always pushing, always reaching for more. Sometimes, her drive felt less about shared success and more about personal glory, a spotlight she craved. She'd brush off my gentle suggestions to slow down, to enjoy the present moment, with a dismissive wave of her hand and a dazzling smile that made me forget my concerns. "Oh, Mateo, you worry too much," she'd say. Or, "Don't you want us to have the very best?" And I did. I wanted the best for us, for her. So I swallowed my small doubts, chalking them up to my own perhaps overly cautious nature. I told myself it was just her zest for life, her entrepreneurial spirit. She often said I was her anchor, her steady North Star, and that made me feel important, necessary. It fed something in me that craved purpose, a purpose I found in being her rock. The real shift began when Elena embarked on her new venture, planning exclusive, high-end desert retreats. She poured herself into it, working long hours, her phone a constant extension of her hand. I admired her dedication, genuinely. She was building something from the ground up, a testament to her vision. That's when Ricardo arrived. She introduced him casually enough, over one of our rare quiet dinners. "Mateo, this is Ricardo," she said, her voice a little brighter than usual. "He's an investor, a really crucial partner for the retreats." Ricardo was exactly as she described him. Charismatic, impeccably dressed, with a laugh that boomed a little too loudly for our dining room. He had the kind of effortless charm that I, in my quiet way, had never possessed. He talked about venture capital and market penetration and luxury experiences with a practiced ease, and I found myself nodding along, trying to understand a world so different from my own. Almost immediately, Ricardo became a fixture. He was at our house for business meetings that stretched into the evenings, his car a familiar sight in our driveway. Elena would tell me, "Ricardo's staying for dinner. We're just hashing out some details." Or, "He's just dropping off some contracts." He was always just something. My initial discomfort was a dull ache. a vague sense of displacement in my own home. I felt like an outsider looking in on a conversation I wasn't privy to, a language I didn't speak. Elena, sensing my unease, would gently reassure me. Mateo, darling, he's just a friend, she'd say, her hand warm on my arm, her eyes full of that familiar sparkle. Or, he's a necessary evil for business. You know how these things are. You're being silly, love. I try to shake off the feeling, the cold knot tightening in my stomach. She was right, wasn't she? This was her dream, her passion. I should be supportive, not suspicious. My quiet strength, the very thing she'd once admired, was now, in her subtle framing, becoming a flaw, a lack of understanding. My attempts to voice my feelings were met with gentle deflections, sometimes a sigh, sometimes a look of exasperation. It made me feel small, petty, insecure. I started to question my own perceptions. Was I being jealous? Paranoid? I didn't want to be that husband. I trusted her. I had to. The destabilizing events weren't sudden, explosive arguments. They were a slow, insidious erosion. Our shared laughter became less frequent. Our quiet evenings, once sacred, were often interrupted by Elena's phone calls or her intense focus on her laptop, a glowing barrier between us. She was always busy, always important. My requests for her time, for just us, were met with explanations about demanding clients or urgent deadlines. She'd kiss me, brief and distracted, and I'd feel her pulling away even as her lips brushed mine. I started spending more time at school, losing myself in the dusty archives of history, finding solace in the predictable patterns of the past. On the football field, the roar of the crowd, the camaraderie of the team, felt real, tangible. It was a stark contrast to the increasing unreality of my home life. When I tried to talk to her, to express how lonely I felt, she'd say, Mateo, you know how much I'm working. Don't make me feel guilty for pursuing my passion. You're supposed to be my biggest supporter. And then I'd feel it, that familiar prickle of guilt. She was right. I was being selfish. I should be proud of her, not burdening her with my insecurities. She had a way of twisting the narrative, so subtly, that I always ended up feeling like the problem. My quiet strength, my tendency to internalize, made me a perfect target. I began to believe I was indeed too sensitive, too demanding. Ricardo's presence amplified everything. He was always there, at every dinner party Elena hosted, at community events, often arriving with her, or leaving with her. Their conversations, even in my presence, had an intimacy I couldn't penetrate. They spoke in shorthand, in knowing glances. He would compliment her lavishly, his hand often lingering on her arm or the small of her back. I'd see it, and my stomach would clench, a cold fist squeezing my insides. But Elena would just smile, a practiced, distant smile, and tell me again, he's just a business partner, Mateo. It's important to maintain a good relationship. And I'd nod, my voice catching somewhere in my chest, unable to articulate the depth of my discomfort without sounding, as she often implied, utterly pathetic. My sleep suffered. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the whir of the air conditioner the only sound in the quiet house, my mind racing. I'd replay conversations, gestures, trying to find definitive proof that my fears were unfounded, or, terrifyingly, that they were entirely real. I started to doubt my own memory, my own sanity. Did she really say that? Did he really look at her that way? Elena's constant reassurances, delivered with such convincing sincerity, became a form of psychological torture. You're imagining things, Mateo. You're making something out of nothing. Why do you always have to be so negative? The woman I loved, the woman who was my world, was slowly, meticulously, dismantling my grasp on reality. The breaking point came, as these things often do, in a moment of accidental discovery. Elena was away again, on another business trip to scout a new retreat location, she said, somewhere up near Sedona. The house felt eerily quiet without her vibrant presence, though by then, the silence had become a familiar companion. I was working on my lesson plans, trying to distract myself from the gnawing emptiness, when my laptop decided to freeze. Frustrated, I remembered Elena had offered to let me use hers if mine ever acted up. She had always been meticulous about her digital security, a bit of a stickler for privacy, which in hindsight, should have been another flag. But at the time, I just thought it was part of her professional persona. I opened her laptop, the screen lighting up a pale blue in the dim evening light. Her desktop was meticulously organized, just like everything else in her life. I searched for a browser, and that's when I saw it. An icon labeled Private Docs was open on the desktop, a folder she'd never mentioned. Curiosity, or perhaps a deep, unsettling intuition, pulled me in. I clicked. Inside, nestled amongst legitimate-looking business proposals and contracts, was another folder, simply titled AZ Dream. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a photo. It was Elena, laughing, her arm wrapped around Ricardo. They were standing by a pool, a breathtaking desert backdrop behind them, the kind of luxury retreat she specialized in. But this wasn't just a business photo. Her head was tilted back, eyes closed, leaning into him, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on her face that I hadn't seen directed at me in months. His arm was around her waist, his fingers almost brushing her hip. I scrolled, my breath catching in my throat. Another photo. They were on a balcony, their silhouettes against a vibrant sunset, his hand in her hair, her head on his shoulder. Then, a series of shots, increasingly intimate. A candid photo of them holding hands across a dinner table, eyes locked. Another, of them sharing a private joke, their faces close, almost touching. They weren't just colleagues. They weren't just friends. They were lovers. The kind of physical closeness, the raw affection, was unmistakable. My world, which I thought was grounded, began to tilt violently on its axis. My fingers trembled as I clicked on a subfolder. Chats. A long thread of text messages opened. My eyes darted across the screen, each word a physical blow. Elena's messages, casual and affectionate. Ricardo's replies, just as warm, punctuated with pet names. My name appeared several times. Asterisk Elena. Mateo is so predictable. He thinks I'm just out pitching ideas for the new retreat. Bless his heart. Asterisk asterisk Ricardo. He's a good man, Elena. Too good for you. Sometimes. Asterisk asterisk Elena. Don't be silly. He serves his purpose. His integrity and good name in the community are invaluable for securing those local grants we discussed. He's the perfect face for our community outreach side of the venture. Asterisk asterisk Ricardo. Our future looks bright, my love. All thanks to your ingenious planning. Asterisk asterisk Elena, and your brilliant financial mind. Soon, we'll have everything we've ever wanted. All the pieces are falling into place. Asterisk the words blurred, then sharpened, each one a razor-sharp shard in my chest. He serves his purpose. His integrity and good name are invaluable. The perfect face for our community outreach. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated, cold-blooded betrayal. I wasn't her partner. I was a pawn. My entire life, my reputation, my quiet strength, all reduced to a utility, a tool in her grand scheme. The desert mirage wasn't just beautiful, it was deadly. It was designed to dehydrate me, to leave me parched and disoriented. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My vision swam. I felt nauseous, physically ill. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, suffocating. I stumbled to the bathroom, bending over the toilet, dry heaving until my throat burned. My knees gave out, and I sank to the cool tile floor, gasping for air. The silence of the house, once a comfort, now felt like a vast, mocking emptiness. When Elena returned 2 days later, I was a shell of myself. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. I had moved through my days at school on autopilot, a zombie teaching the rise and fall of empires, oblivious to the fact that my own empire had already crumbled. The knot in my stomach had become a rock, heavy and unyielding. My chest ached with a pain far deeper than any physical injury. She walked in, her usual vivacious self, carrying a small gift for me, a book on ancient Roman architecture. I remember thinking, even then, what a cruel irony. She tried to kiss me, but I flinched away, an involuntary reaction. Her smile faltered. Mateo, what's wrong? She asked, her voice laced with a concern that I now recognized as a performance. I couldn't speak. I just pointed to her laptop, still sitting on the coffee table where I'd left it. My finger trembled. Her eyes followed my gaze, and I saw a flicker of something, a subtle shift in her expression, a microsecond of calculation before the mask of innocent confusion settled back on her face. What about it? I couldn't bring myself to say the words. I just looked at her, my eyes pleading, begging for her to deny it, to explain it away, to give me one last shred of the woman I thought I knew. She picked up the laptop, her movements slow, deliberate. She opened it, and her eyes scanned the screen, landing on the open folders, the photos, the messages. Her shoulders stiffened. The air in the room crackled with tension. She closed the laptop, placing it gently back on the table. She looked at me, and for the first time, the mask was gone. Her eyes were cold, distant, devoid of any warmth I had ever seen. The betrayal wasn't just in the act. It was in that chilling, blank gaze. "Matteo," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "I can explain." "No," I whispered, my voice hoarse, raw. "You don't need to. I saw everything." A long silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. She sighed, a small, impatient sound. "You weren't supposed to find that," she said, her tone devoid of apology, only annoyance. My heart shattered, truly and completely. It wasn't just a metaphor anymore. I felt a physical ripping sensation in my chest. "So it's true then? All of it? Ricardo? The plans? Me? As just a means to an end?" She met my gaze directly, her eyes like chips of ice. "Yes, Matteo. All of it." She paused, then added, her voice chillingly clinical, "It was a good plan. You were useful. Your reputation in this town, your network, it would have helped us secure significant funding. The grants. People trust you. Useful." That word echoed in the empty chambers of my soul. Useful. Not loved. Not cherished. Not a partner. Just useful. "Why, Elena?" My voice broke. "Why would you do this? To me?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Because you were comfortable, Matteo. Predictable. Safe. But safe isn't enough for me. I need more. Ricardo understands that. He shares my vision. You never quite got it, did you? You just wanted a quiet life. I want to build an empire. And you were in the way. Or rather, you were a bridge." The brutal honesty, the sheer cold calculation, was more devastating than any angry accusation. It wasn't about passion or a moment of weakness. It was a conscious, prolonged manipulation, a strategy. My entire relationship, my entire marriage, had been a performance, a prolonged act designed to exploit my inherent trust, my quiet strength, my good name. I stood there, paralyzed, a strange detachment settling over me. The pain was too immense to feel all at once. It was like my soul had detached from my body, hovering above, watching the scene unfold. This wasn't the woman I married. This was a stranger, a predator cloaked in the familiar skin of my wife. The emotional collapse didn't happen in a fit of rage, but in a profound, soul-deep numbness. I couldn't scream, couldn't cry. There were no tears left to shed. I felt hollowed out, a desert landscape after 1,000 years of wind and sun, barren and desolate. The love I had felt, the hopes I had nurtured, all turned to dust. The awakening was a slow, agonizing process, like waking from a coma. In the days and weeks that followed, I moved through my life in a fog. I filed for divorce. Elena didn't fight it. She seemed eager to move on, to sever the last ties to her useful past. The legal proceedings were clinical, impersonal, as if divorcing a stranger. She took what she needed for her new life with Ricardo, leaving me with the house and the wreckage of my own. I started to see everything in a new light. Every seemingly innocent remark, every gentle reassurance, every brush off, they all clicked into place, pieces of a horrifying puzzle. The gaslighting, the subtle emotional abuse, the way she had made me doubt my own instincts, my own sanity. It wasn't me who was paranoid. It was her who was a master manipulator. My quiet strength wasn't a flaw. It was a vulnerability she had preyed upon. The thought of facing my students, my team, the community that knew and respected me, felt impossible. How could I teach history when my own history had been such a cruel lie? How could I coach resilience when I felt utterly broken? I needed to escape, to breathe air that hadn't been poisoned by her deception. The first steps to leave were the hardest. I resigned from coaching, a part of my life I'd poured my heart into for years. It felt like tearing off a limb. I took a sabbatical from teaching, explaining to my principal that I needed time to deal with a personal crisis. He looked at me with understanding, no questions asked, which only made me feel more exposed, more ashamed. My carefully built life, the one I thought was so solid, was gone. I packed a small bag, leaving behind the house, the memories, the ghost of the man I used to be. I drove north, away from the familiar heat and dust of Phoenix, towards the cooler, pine-scented air of northern Arizona. I found a remote cabin, nestled deep in the forest outside Flagstaff, a place where the stars were so bright they felt close enough to touch, and the silence was profound, healing. In that cabin, isolated from the world, I began the long, arduous journey of healing. I spent my days hiking the mountain trails, the rhythmic crunch of pine needles under my boots a soothing counterpoint to the turmoil in my mind. I read voraciously, not just my history textbooks, but ancient philosophy, texts on resilience, on betrayal, on rebuilding. I found parallels in the stories of ancient empires, of heroes betrayed by those they trusted most. It wasn't just my story, it was a human story as old as time itself. Knowing that, somehow, lessened the crushing weight of personal shame. I journaled, filling notebook after notebook with my raw, unfiltered thoughts, the anger, the grief, the slow, dawning understanding. I allowed myself to feel the pain, to acknowledge the depth of the wound. There were days I would just sit and stare out at the towering pines, tears streaming down my face, feeling the emptiness within. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, something began to shift. The numbness receded, replaced by a quiet, aching sadness, which in turn gave way to a flicker of something else, defiance. I started to trust my instincts again, those small whispers of unease I had once dismissed. I learned to listen to that inner voice, to honor my own perceptions. I realized that my quiet strength wasn't a flaw. It was a core part of who I was. And it was a strength that could endure even this. I wasn't defined by her betrayal. I was defined by how I chose to rebuild. The journey wasn't linear. There were days of regression, days when the memories would rush back, sharp and painful, threatening to pull me back into the abyss of despair. But each time, I found a way to pull myself out, a little stronger, a little wiser. I learned to cultivate an inner peace that was no longer dependent on anyone else's validation, on anyone else's love. It was a peace born of self-acceptance, of understanding my own worth, independent of external judgment. After nearly a year, I felt a familiar pull to return to my calling. I went back to teaching, not just history, but a new kind of history, one infused with lessons of resilience, of human vulnerability, and the enduring power of the spirit. I still taught the football team, but my focus had shifted from just winning games to building character, to teaching them about the importance of trust and the dangers of blind faith. I shared parts of my story, vaguely, carefully, emphasizing the lessons learned, the importance of listening to one's gut, of honoring oneself. The desert mirage had vanished, leaving behind the harsh, beautiful reality of the landscape. Elena, I heard through the grapevine, had continued with her venture, with Ricardo by her side. I saw her once, from a distance, at a community event. She still radiated that vibrant energy, that practiced charm. But I saw through it now. I saw the calculation, the underlying emptiness. And for the first time, I felt no anger, no pain. Just a quiet, profound sense of gratitude that I was no longer caught in her illusion. My life isn't perfect. The scars remain, subtle but present, a reminder of the depths of betrayal. But I am whole again, stronger in a way I never was before. I have rediscovered the quiet strength that was always within me, not as a vulnerability to be exploited, but as an anchor in the shifting sands of life. I walk on solid ground now, no longer chasing an illusion. And that, in itself, is a victory. The sun still sets over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. But now, I see it for what it truly is, beautiful, real, and untainted by deception.